Scorpion. Sub-Zero. Spider-Man! Deathstroke.
I apologise for making you guys wait so long for the second episode in the Fusion series, but alas, here we are. We will be combining Mortal Kombat Scorpion and Sub-Zero to form the Frozen Flame. For the opponent, we have Marvel's Spider-Man and DC's Deathstroke, merging to form the Arachnid Assassin. Just like last time, the fusions are intended to combine the dominant aspects of both characters for their respective fusion. In regards to the criteria we will be pulling from, Scorpion and Sub-Zero will be observed as of the Netherealm trilogy, from Mortal Kombat 9 to 11. Information from the previous timeline will be used as reference, so long as it does not conflict with the current material. The same principle will also be applied to Deathstroke and Spider-Man. Their respective showings across their various comic book appearances will be analysed and explored, again, as long as the info is consistent. Now enough babbling from me, and let's get this next Fusion Versus underway.
Round 1.
Before his death and rebirth, Scorpion was at the peak of his physicality. Since being revived as a Spectre, and later being restored to human form, he could make use of his newfound superhuman strength to overpower almost all of his opponents. Hanzo has been shown to be able to punch right through and rip people's heads clean from their bodies. Even before his original death, Scorpion was already capable of outpacing and blitzing other human opponents. As of now, he can keep pace with other superhuman beings, even dispatching multiple targets at once before any of them could respond. Coupled with his expertise in acrobatics and evasive maneuvers, and Scorpion makes for a very swift and deadly opponent. As for his resilience, Scorpion is utterly disturbing. Although he can be killed by something like a decapitation, he will almost always keep coming back for more. Perhaps his most impressive showing of resilience comes from his fight with a possessed Sub-Zero. During this battle, Hanzo's entire torso was impaled right through by Sub-Zero's frozen spikes, and yet he still kept fighting, whilst also tanking multiple powerful hits, and yet he hardly showed any signs of hindrance thereafter. Although he has learnt to let go of his rage by the time of his most recent depiction, it is always something that anyone should be wary of, lest he becomes stronger, and his enemies suffer his wrath. Sub-Zero is a descendant of the ancient Cryomancer race originally hailing from Outworld, making him something of a hybrid between his ancestors and humans. As a result, he inherited a level of superhuman physicality, a notion reinforced by the MKX comic and MK11 writer Sean Kittleson, who has mentioned that Mortal Kombat characters with some form of magic in their blood are to be considered above peak human. In many ways, Sub-Zero is a near match to his infernal counterpart, Scorpion. Strength-wise, Kuai Liang has been witnessed smashing frozen skulls and blast doors, along with ripping both people and cyborgs alike in half. Equally as fast as he was strong, Sub-Zero was capable of avoiding and dodging attacks from other humanoid enemies, including rockets that he was previously unaware of. In addition, this high level of speed allowed him to fight off and dispatch several foes at once. Finally, Sub-Zero was remarkably resilient. Kuai Liang has tanked powerful attacks from characters such as Sector and Scorpion and continued to fight with minimal penalty. He has also survived multiple stabbing wounds along with a point-blank blast from a flamethrower as well as the rage-fueled hellfire breath of Scorpion, although this did nearly result in his death. Regardless, Sub-Zero is an everlasting example of just how tough Earthrealm's warriors are. Nothing short of a debilitating blow or fatal attack is going to stop him. After being bitten by a radioactive spider, Peter Parker became one of the strongest heroes within the Marvel franchise, originally only being behind figures such as the Hulk, Thor, and the Thing. Of course, that was before many other prominent characters were introduced and explored. Regardless, Spider-Man is not one to be taken lightly. His unique mutation effectively afforded him the strength proportions of the creatures he shared his name with. The web crawler was capable of smashing through solid concrete and stone with little effort, along with breaking free from steel chains by merely flexing, and even staggering the Hulk with one of his punches. Peter's strength has also allowed him to go toe-to-toe with other powerful figures such as Venom and the Green Goblin, both powerful foes in their own right. Speed-wise, Spider-Man has mastered the use of acrobatics, as his fighting style is heavily reliant on their use. As a result, he has often moved too fast to be seen, even evading peak-level humans, such as Daredevil. Peter could maintain this speed for nigh indefinite periods of time, never slowing in momentum or pace, all the while rarely showing signs of exhaustion. However, it wasn't just his strength that allowed him to stand up to some of Marvel's most dangerous, but also his incredible durability. Bolstered by a slight healing factor, Spidey has survived and endured attacks from the aforementioned foes, as well as withstanding falls from massive heights, along with the weight of massive amounts of rubble landing on him. What's interesting to note about Spider-Man is that in many forms of Marvel media, he is portrayed as a young man, and thus not yet at the height of his physical prime, suggesting that he is yet to achieve his peak. Nevertheless, Peter Parker is worthy of his nickname, the Amazing Spider-Man, on the basis of his physicality alone. A remarkable specimen of speed and power. Once he was injected with the Super Soldier Serum, Slade Wilson became one of the most formidable human beings to walk the Earth, having achieved the peak of human potential. His physical power allowed him to put the hurt on various superhuman opponents, including the likes of Hawkman, Wonder Girl, and Starfire. In addition to kicking in steel doors, as well as being able to turn virtually any object into a lethal weapon. Deathstroke's speed was just as devastating. He could dispatch several enemies in an instant before any of them had the chance to react. His reflexes allowed him to intercept and both deflect and evade bullets, as well as evade an unsuspecting Superman in one instance, as well as landing hits on notable speedsters such as Kid Flash and the Flash himself, although this does involve a solid degree of precise aiming and anticipation as well. Bestowed with incredible durability and endurance, Slade could seemingly fight for hours and fend off attacks from multiple powerful assailants at once. He was also capable of fighting through almost any non-lethal attack, including gunshot wounds and severe stabbings. Slade's durability was also bolstered thanks to his healing factor and armor. As Slade himself has noted, his healing factor allowed him to heal from stabbing wounds in a matter of hours, and gunshots could be healed within the space of a day. Though it should be noted that injuries such as a decapitation or a stab through the heart will end his life. Courtesy of various armors, which we will discuss later, Slade could withstand attacks from some of DC's heaviest of hitters, including a clone of Lobo, a character that has been known to rival characters such as Superman and Wonder Woman in terms of power, characters that Slade has also held his own against, albeit thanks to the boosting properties of the Godkiller sword. Lastly, Slade's senses were greatly increased, heightening his focus exponentially. which we will also discuss later. The Terminator is a name that Deathstroke is worthy of thanks to his physical power alone. Out of all the sections in this video, this was the one that I had the least amount of trouble deciding a victor for. When combining characters like Sub-Zero and Scorpion, their respective fusion doesn't add or detract much from either character, beyond giving us what we already know. The Arachnid Assassin, on the other hand, is a completely different story. The serum used on Deathstroke pushes a human's physicality to its absolute peak, better than it could ever have been otherwise. And while Spider-Man does possess the strength proportions of a spider, he is still human, meaning that the serum is going to push the Arachnid Assassin's physicality to a level further than what either Peter or Slade have accomplished. And that's before we factor in the combination of the two healing factors, and while I don't think the Arachnid Assassin would possess a regenerative ability similar to someone like Wolverine, and thus he would still be killable, there will be something of an improvement overall. Now this isn't to say the Frozen Flame is 100% outclassed. In some instances, Scorpion and Sub-Zero have fought through similar injuries to their opponents, so I can see an argument being made for the Frozen Flame having a similar level of pain tolerance. However, when all is said and done, the Arachnid Assassin simply outclasses him everywhere else, and as a result, it is he who is awarded the advantage in physicality.
Round 2.
As the Grandmaster of the Shirai Ryu, Hanzo Hasashi spent his years crafting himself into one of Mortal Kombat's most lethal combatants. Over the course of his depictions, he's been credited to possess skills in Ninjutsu, Hapkido, Pigwa Kwan, and Mugai Ryu. I won't be counting Muay Fa, as this style was created and taught by the Elder Gods to their champions, and Scorpion was only their champion in the original timeline, and thus it's unlikely that this skill was carried over into the new timeline. In addition to his experience as a martial artist, Scorpion is also a formidable swordsman and ninja, masterful in the use of stealth and taking down enemies in melee-focused combat. Hanzo is also a well-practiced marksman, though not in the traditional sense. Instead, he is capable of hurling his kunai through the air with great precision, only missing against opponents of equal or greater caliber than himself, or when he otherwise never intended to hit them in the first place. To make matters worse for his opponents, Hanzo was also a very elusive combatant, often chaining in the use of his Hellfire powers separately, or by channeling them through his weaponry, increasing their damage output. When combining all of these assets together, Scorpion could get the drop on almost any foe, and has shown such great feats as defeating the likes of Kung Lao and the combined might of Pre-Cyber, Sector and Cyrax. In addition, he has defeated or killed several lesser known and unnamed cyber ninjas, along with both Sub-Zero brothers, as well as defeating a bloodlusted Raiden, although those under the Blood Curse do become more savage in exchange for extra power. Regardless, Hanzo Hasashi is capable of going toe-to-toe with some of the most powerful combatants to ever live, and those he cannot outright defeat will still feel his burning sting. Much like his Shirai Ryu counterpart, Sub-Zero was crafted into one of Earth's deadliest combatants, dedicating his entire life to honing and improving his skills in battle. Kuai Liang is known to have mastered multiple martial arts, including Shotokan Karate, as well as the dragon variation of Kung Fu. Sub-Zero would mix the elements of these styles into his overall technique, making him a formidable warrior. Combined with his skills in hand-to-hand combat, Sub-Zero was also a master in the realm of swordsmanship, having used this technique to great effect against assailants in the past. In addition, he was exceptionally talented at incorporating the use of his Cryomancer powers into his overall offensive in a variety of ways. By doing so, Kuai Liang awards himself far more options in battle, as opposed to some of his fellow Earthrealm comrades. While this combination of powers and skill made Sub-Zero a very elusive foe to face off against, he reinforced this even further by way of manipulating his enemies in battle. For example, he appeared to be fond of making use of feints, tricking his opponents into thinking he was in a state of misfortune.
faint. Bravo.
Kung Jin, you should rally your companions rather than mock your superiors.
Over the course of his career, this extensive variety of abilities has allowed Sub-Zero to face off against and even defeat several high-caliber opponents, having bested all of his previous Lin Kuei comrades, defeating the combined might of the towering Goro and Kintaro, the Soul Collective of Ermac, as well as trading victory and loss with Scorpion. Those who stand in Sub-Zero's way will feel death's cold embrace. In terms of his abilities in combat, Spider-Man is, in my opinion, one of the most interesting. For a long time, his fighting style relied almost heavily on his newfound spider-like agility, reinforced by his spider sense. This allowed Peter to overwhelm several varieties of enemies without much issue. However, his fighting style would eventually see a solid degree of refinement. After experiencing a loss of his spider sense, and with the help of Shang-Chi, Peter created an all-new fighting style known as the Way of the Spider. This style was an adaptation of Kung Fu, which allowed Peter to take full advantage of his superhuman abilities without the need for preemptive warning. Presumably, this led to skills with the more standard practices of Kung Fu as well. Possessing a genius-level intellect, Spider-Man was also a remarkably clever fighter. Using his newfound powers to aid him in battle, he often made use of things such as the environment to assist him in combat. While many a foe could pick something up and throw it at their enemy, Peter instead integrated the use of his web shooters, attacking foes from various angles at range, or by using them to catch thrown projectiles before hurling them back at the opponent, and even disarming enemies of their weapons, as well as boasting a whole heap of other options. He would also use things such as walls and ceilings as alternate surfaces to stand on, giving him an environmental advantage most adversaries could not replicate. This unique approach to combat allows Spider-Man to take on a large variety of powerful and unusual opponents, even granting him the ability to hold his own against foes that outclass him in terms of pure skill. Such examples of his talents in battle stem from fights against the Sinister Six, Venom, the Green Goblin, Daredevil, Captain America, Wolverine, and a whole host of others. At the end of the day, Peter Parker is one whose web you don't want to get caught up in. Deathstroke is known to many as the best assassin on Earth. Having achieved this title through his combined abilities in combat and his strategic brilliance, Slade Wilson is held in high regard for his tactical prowess, with notable beings such as Batman and Superman recognizing his abilities, as well as several others including Roy Harper, who considered Slade to be the best tactician on the planet. Courtesy of the serum used to enhance his abilities, Slade's brain now uses 90% of its total capacity, essentially functioning as a supercomputer. In combat, Slade is constantly assessing and evaluating every move made by himself and the enemy. Thanks to this and his extensive experience, Deathstroke, in his own words, knows every move you make before you make it. Courtesy of his enhanced brain power, Slade can process information at an increased rate, and as such is believed to have mastered almost every martial art known to man. Naturally, his years as a soldier honed him into an astute marksman, which, as you might have guessed, he honed to an even greater level thanks to his enhanced senses, with accuracy that could rival that of world-renowned marksmen among the likes of Deadshot and Green Arrow. Naturally, this level of precision extended to the use of thrown weapons too. One of my personal favourite examples being when he used a thrown paperclip to kill a fly. On the subject of weaponry, Deathstroke is an expert in the fields of melee-focused combat, showing great skill in both swordsmanship and staff-based combat. He further improved his performance by integrating the use of his firearms and the environment into his fighting technique, adding another layer of lethality and unpredictability. All of these abilities have allowed Slade to pull off some incredible feats of skill, having defeated Batman in their first encounter, as well as besting several members of the Teen Titans at once, and most notably, having defeated multiple members of the Justice League, effectively manipulating them and exploiting each of their weaknesses. As Green Arrow said, Slade is like Batman. Everything is calculated, and his achievements in battle definitely show it. Deathstroke's nickname, the Terminator, is most certainly well earned. As I said in my first fusion video, one important thing we have to consider for a matchup such as this is that we are not just combining the skill set of each fusion's counterparts, but we are also combining the dominant aspects from everything else, most notably their mindsets, and thus it is important for us to consider how this might affect the fusion character itself. For example, Spider-Man's most dominant mental trait would be his intelligence, but he does not kill. And as a result, he often holds back, or in other words, doesn't bring his full power to bear. Deathstroke's most dominant mental traits would be his tactical brilliance and his intense military-based discipline. This discipline focus is something that I feel would cancel out Spider-Man's intent on holding back, which in turn would effectively mean that the Arachnid assassin will be fighting at full power. The Frozen Flame brings something similar too. Sub-Zero and Scorpion have fought against each other and with each other countless times, and are a near-perfect team. Now that we have combined them, along with their minds, the Frozen Flame will be able to take full advantage of the strengths that both bring to the table. However, when it comes down to the wire, the abilities that are brought forth by the Frozen Flame's counterparts is nothing new to the counterparts of the Arachnid assassin. To be fair, countering is going to be risky business for the assassin, courtesy of the innate skill and fluidity from within his opponent. However, with similar experience and a higher tactical capacity, leads me to believe that the Arachnid assassin should be awarded the advantage in combative skill.
Round 3.
Scorpion's arsenal consists of a deadly combination of weaponry and hellish powers. As is standard for ninjas, he carried katana-shaped swords on his person. His most infamous weapon was of course his twin kunai spears. These deadly edged weapons were attached to a chain fastened on his waist, and could be used to impale opponents from a distance, or he could make use of them as extra stabbing weapons. But of course, what Scorpion is most famed for is his use of Hellfire. This power remained in his arsenal even after his restoration. Hanzo has described it as an emotional trigger, as he has to relive the painful memories of losing his family to summon the Inferno. If left unchecked, this can be very dangerous, as he is susceptible to falling victim to his rage, and can become intolerable to reasoning. This was especially apparent whilst he was still a Spectre, and even for a large portion of his life up until MKX. Fortunately for us, we are using him as he appears in Mortal Kombat 11, and by this time he had learned to control his emotions. Much like how Darth Bane would say that the Juyo lightsaber form is all about the mastery of control and not the loss of it, so too is Hanzo's use of Hellfire. By this time, he could summon the Inferno without succumbing to his emotions, and demonstrated a lot more control, having accepted his past mistakes and the loss of his loved ones. This is most evident when he shows that he is content with simply defeating those who were complicit in the demise of his clan. In regards to what his Hellfire allows Scorpion to perform, well, for one, it actually grants him an immunity to the properties of regular fire. And of course, he can project his power, whether by throwing fireballs at his opponents or by breathing a blast of blistering heat in the direction of his target. This projectile attack is so strong that not only can it cause serious damage to those who supposedly resist fire-based attacks, such as Sub-Zero, but he can also obliterate most opponents, destroying massive chunks of their body. In addition, Hanzo has the ability to teleport, which he has used for both inter-realm travel and in battle, which when combined with his skills in stealth and his incredible use of acrobatics, made him a very difficult opponent to counter, even for those familiar with his techniques. In addition, Scorpion can channel his Hellfire through his weapons, increasing their damage output. For example, he can channel it through his chains to completely implode the flesh of his enemies, leaving nothing but a skeleton behind, as well as giving his kunai chain the power to completely slice someone in half. Now yes, these are shown through brutalities and fatalities, However, the MKX comic pretty much confirms that these mechanics are canon to the characters, as not only do most brutalities, and practically all fatalities, make use of abilities that are unique to each character, but Sub-Zero and Mileena have also demonstrated these abilities in the comic, established written material. Scorpion's fire was also explosive, allowing him to take out multiple opponents at once, and scatter large groups of assailants. Lastly, he occasionally summoned a demonic minion to distract and grapple his opposition into place, granting him a free hit. Overall, Scorpion's Hellfire power grants him a vast amount of variable ways to take down his opposition, and a devastating amount of destructive potential. Sub-Zero is very much the direct opposite of his counterpart Scorpion, and is both easily comparable in terms of variety and power. As his name suggests, Sub-Zero is a cryomancer, meaning that he has the power to control, manipulate, and create ice. To get the obvious outlier out of the way, Kuai Liang did once manage to freeze an entire city. However, Scorpion noted that this was not within the scope of his usual abilities, and was a result of being amped by the blood curse of the Kamidogu dagger. However, even when under his own power, Sub-Zero was not lacking for raw potency. He could summon blizzards to freeze large crowds of enemies, and even conceal his whereabouts, which would likely be bolstered through his masterful use of stealth, given his background as a ninja and assassin. Kuai Liang could freeze targets at both long and short range distances, whether by projecting an ice blast from his hand or through physical contact. When freezing a target by contact, he could freeze them right through to their core, weakening their structure, allowing him to smash through a steel chain as well as human skulls and nuclear blast doors. Sub-Zero was also incredibly creative with his powers, as he could create virtually any solid object that came to mind, and use it as a melee weapon in battle. These would typically range from things such as swords, axes, knives, massive hammers, along with the occasional shield, and so on. In addition, he could apply his powers lethally from a distance, throwing out a rapid flurry of frozen spikes to impale foes. Using his iconic Ice Slide maneuver, he could enhance his speed to send foes flying and move at paces too fast for most enemies to keep up with. Much like Scorpion, Kuai Liang had his own form of teleportation, where he could scatter his body into frozen particles on the ground, and reform behind his opponents in an instant. In addition, the Cryomancer could use his abilities in a form of defense, having frozen a Lin Kuei cyborg to protect himself from one of Sector's rockets, as well as possessing the ability to coat himself in a layer of spikes, enhancing his durability, as well as allowing him to freeze or impale opponents. His power was easily capable of standing up to the 3000 degree heat of Sector's flamethrower, a feat he demonstrated twice, even claiming to have held back in the first instance. But most impressively, he created an ice shield that allowed him to withstand an explosion that completely destroyed a nuclear fallout shelter from the inside, with him still in it. Not only did this shield protect him from the blaze, but it also froze anyone on touch, and yet Sub-Zero did this without showing any kind of strain on his behalf, suggesting that he's capable of even greater achievements when pushed. If it wasn't already made clear, Sub-Zero is far more than a man who just throws ice at people, as he brings a vast amount of options and raw power to battle that will allow him to put pressure on virtually any opponent. Peter Parker didn't make use of many weapons, as he largely didn't need to, being something of a weapon himself. However, the tools he brought to the table offered him great support in combat. The most obvious ability that Peter can make use of is his Spider Sense. This ability acts as a tingling sensation that alerts Spider-Man and those like him to incoming danger. As the norm, the tingling sensation becomes more intense when presented with a closer threat or greater danger. However, this power is not a trump card for Spider-Man, as its effectiveness still comes down to Peter's own speed and reflexes, as if he can't react in time, then he'll get hit by whatever is being thrown at him. Fortunately for the web slinger, this usually isn't an issue given his incredible speed, but it is something to make note of. Spider-Man's mutation allows him to walk and crawl on vertical surfaces and even ceilings, meaning that he can use virtually any terrain to his advantage, making him a rather unique opponent for the majority of combatants facing him. Lastly, Spider-Man personally developed his signature web shooters, allowing him to project a web-like fluid from his wrists that is strong enough to hold up massive heavy loads and ensnare even some superhuman opponents. In addition, the web shooters could fire out the webbing in a variety of different modes, ranging from dozens to hundreds depending on your source, which bolsters his options greatly. The fluid within his cartridges does have a limited supply, but each cartridge typically holds out long enough for Spider-Man to continue a long-term fight, plus he typically kept multiple cartridges on hand at any given moment. While certain suits, such as the Iron Spider, provide even more abilities, we are only focusing on his standard attire. Overall, Peter Parker's spider powers and equipment enhance his versatility in battle and greatly bolster his survivability. Deathstroke is a walking weapons cache, possessing a vast amount of equipment and armor. The mesh under his suit was comprised of a highly durable material known as Promethium, essentially the DC Universe's version of vibranium. This material could absorb and cushion massive amounts of energy from impacts, as it showcased when it withstood a massive energy blast from Starfire, to which she was stunned that Slade was still alive, suggesting that the blast was intended to be lethal. The Flash also described it as painful to punch, akin to hitting a brick wall, showing just how effective the mesh is at protecting the wearer. Deathstroke's main armor casing was comprised of a magical material known as nth metal, the material used by Hawkman. This material was also incredibly strong, having withstood having a submarine thrown on top of it, as well as taking blows from the clone of Lobo, a combatant who has been known to trade blows with the likes of Superman. Furthermore, the armor is said to enhance the abilities and properties of the wearer, which would naturally bolster things such as Slade's healing factor, and other abilities, like his enhanced brain function. However, Slade did not boast the benefits to the same degree as someone like Hawkman, as it was suggested that his armor wasn't comprised of pure nth metal, and Hawkman speculated that it may be mixed with other materials, explaining why it didn't bolster the assassin's abilities to the same extent as his winged counterpart. Naturally, both of Slade's armors were resistant to things such as bullets, acids, and the occasional slicing attack, depending on the weapon used by the opponent. Deathstroke carried 1 to 2 hardened swords, made from Promethium, possessing enough strength and durability to allow him to slice clean through the wing of a plane. In tandem, he also employed the use of small edge weapons, such as knives and daggers. Courtesy of his time in the military, Slade employed the use of firearms, owning a gun for virtually all situations. Slade's typical firearm of choice would be small issue weapons, such as handguns and pistols, as he could more effectively wield them in tandem with his swords, though he would also make use of the occasional machine gun and sniper rifle. He also carried several thrown weapons, ranging from different types of grenades, including the likes of flashbangs, gas and smoke, which could be used to incapacitate or distract targets. His mask also housed internal sound sensors, as well as things such as heat vision and infrared, amplifying his spatial awareness. Sometimes he would make use of a grappling cable mounted on his wrist, which could be used for greater environmental positioning or to latch on to opponents. And last but not least is Deathstroke's iconic energy staff. Also comprised of Promethium, this was Slade's melee weapon of choice, and is arguably his most versatile piece of equipment. Aside from being an effective melee weapon, the staff could also unleash high-powered charges of energy that resulted in massive amounts of damage, allowing him to blast clean through stone walls and destroy vehicles such as helicopters and cars. Also, the weapon was retractable and detachable, allowing Deathstroke to separate it into 2 smaller weapons if he desired. The weapon also featured fingerprint sensors, preventing anyone other than Slade from firing the weapon. Overall, Deathstroke is geared to take on any opponent, as he boasts a plethora of equipment, allowing him to effectively combat any given situation. In my opinion, this round is the closest, and was the trickiest one to decide. There is no doubt in my mind that the Arachnid Assassin is better equipped. However, we also can't deny the fact that the Frozen Flame is bestowed with more variety when it comes to combative powers. In one corner, the Assassin's armor will certainly grant greater protection against the more standard attacks used by the Ninja Fusion. Plus, the magical benefits of the Nth Metal will now enhance all of Spider-Man's abilities, not just Deathstroke's, including the Spider Sense. However, the Frozen Flame is going to receive even more versatility than you might think, as he isn't just gaining the powers of Scorpion and Sub-Zero, but now he'll be able to make use of them in tandem with each other and combine their use. One possible example could be stabbing and freezing an opponent with an ice sword, and following up by channeling Hellfire along the Frozen Blade. And yes, the ice swords can withstand brief exposure to the Hellfire, as they have done so in the past. And that's just one of infinite possibilities. Ultimately, I see this as something of a tie, as while the Arachnid Assassin may be better equipped and protected, I believe that the Frozen Flame has more versatility and possesses the tools necessary to deal with everything thrown at him. No edge given.
Final round.
There were many factors for me to consider when deciding on this verdict, since both fusions bring a great deal to the table and are sure to give each other a worthy fight. For the final tally, I would award an 8 out of 10 advantage to the victor. The initial contest would start as a pure demonstration of martial prowess, with both sides assessing each other and probing for a weakness. Upon not being able to find an opening in his opponent's form, the Frozen Flame begins incorporating a mixed and matched use of his powers, switching between the two in an attempt to off-throw his opponent. This initial attack would catch the Arachnid Assassin by surprise, being forced to evade the subsequent barrage of frost and flame. After evading for several minutes and gaining a better understanding of his opponent's abilities, the Arachnid Assassin responds in kind, combining wall climbing and firearms. Now both would employ the full extent of their new abilities, maybe even scaling the environment. However, one will have a higher success rate when it comes to bypassing his opponent's defenses and breaching his opponent's guard. The fight would be arduous and lengthy, but the assassin would better anticipate his opponent's attacks, countering more effectively, whilst boasting better protection from the enemy's power. Eventually, the brutal contest would end in a single swift motion, with the Arachnid Assassin slicing the head clean from the Frozen Flame, after detecting and countering an incoming surprise attack. As such, the Arachnid Assassin, the fusion between Spider-Man and Deathstroke, is declared the victor. And it is finally done and dusted, the second fusion video. I hope you all enjoyed this installment, as I thoroughly did when it came down to making this matchup and discussing it with others. I promise I'll try not to leave it as long as when I do the next episode. As always, feel free to follow me on Twitter if you would like to keep up to date with the channel, and until next time, I'll catch you all in the next video.